Okay, everyone, we'll get started. So quickly just introduce myself. My name is Jason McBride, and this is Patrick Blake. We're from Allstate. Today we're going to give a talk about enterprise API strategies. I think it might be better titled Enterprise Problems, because we're going to start by really telling the story about what problems you have when you actually have to start thinking of this in enterprise level. Some of the things that we have seen, the journey we've been through, talking to developers, the frustrations, the things that people don't think about when they first set out. So we're going to take through that, and then we're going to talk about some of the things we're thinking about trying to do to try and solve some of those problems. And then Patty's going to jump into a little bit about one of the tools we're using, Camel, to talk about basically what that means to us, what we used it for, some things we have found really helpful, and hopefully some recommendations that people can jump on the back. It's a massive area, so we're just going to focus in on that one part. So that said, we'll get started. So this chart was basically us starting about an API experience. The experience factors is really the frustrations, the problems you've faced. If you're a small team of like 2 or 3 people, you can talk to each other, you all agree how to do it. And there was a talk actually here earlier on where the guys set up a nice cookie cutter, so when they were creating microservices, they were all the same. When you've got an organization of maybe 2,000, 4,000, 10,000 developers, seriously, trying to get them to create APIs that actually looks anywhere like the same that can be reused, it gets incredibly hard. Consistency. How do you actually get an organization that may actually be up and running? Well, let's face it, they are up and running, they've been about for years, and try to think about how do you get direction to get consistency. The different languages, the different APIs that are used, the different styles, how they're going to communicate, it's impossible. The rules in use, and you can see this is some of the things we just mapped out as the challenges to that, and why developer experience sometimes can be so bad when you get into enterprise API strategy. Security. It's never considered, because usually it's like 2 or 3 guys but do something amazing, and next thing everybody wants it. But they didn't really think about the external web-facing, money-making piece of the organization that now wants to leverage it. And they're going, we can't give you this because we didn't think of security at the start. Missing gateways. Again, when you think about how you scale these things, gives controls, people haven't really thought these things out. And then on the other side of the fence, when you're actually, boss turns around and says, build this thing, how do you get started? Where do you even begin? And trying to create something for them. So this is some of the things we mapped out, and I hope a lot of people in the room recognize some of these problems, because I know over my years, have had the exact same frustrations. So we started bucketing them together to try and think about, well, how do you solve these? You can't solve them by yourself, is rule number 1, because if you come up, right, I've solved all these, now follow my rule, you're going to fail, because nobody likes to be told what to do. So you have to bucket them together. And we went out and talked to big corporations. They have their own security organization. So go and talk to them. What do they want? Talk to them about your problems. So API tokens, authentication authorization, very, very sensitive piece. And tell them they should be doing this, not you. Very important piece. You shouldn't be, if you're thinking from an enterprise perspective, you shouldn't be inventing certain wheels. You shouldn't be building these things. The enterprise should be telling you, when I say enterprise, I'm talking about big corporations, they should be like giving it to you, or you should be taking something off the street that already does this. Because if you try to build your own, you're not going to be able to integrate with or use with anybody else, because they'll be sitting going, well, we don't use that. Standardization. Again, as we build these, typical corporations can have, it's easy to see 5,000, 10,000, 25,000, 100,000 different APIs that they may be using for different parts of their organization as they build out. So the lack of that standard is one of the biggest problems you have to face. Even down to basically how do you create the specifications. We'll talk a bit later about common information models, again, challenges you might have to face off with. The bottom one here, the developer experience, is one that's really close to me. Is the developer, if you're trying to stand up a new team and they have to get on board with that experience, it can absolutely be killer. A couple of the buttons really mean here is really around where we might see the challenges, but it's still forming. So this is one of the things we thought about when we were trying to work out, well, what are we going to do to try and fix these problems? We started out with this idea of like, okay, different categories, building people together. API design. As an enterprise, you need to think about a common information model. I'm not saying you need to build a model that everybody has to live into, but people need to know when you send a message and it says date of birth, what format it's going to be in. It's not going to say DOB. It's not going to say birth. It's not going to say something else, D_B. You have to come up with language that people can all work together on. It's not the sexiest piece in the world, unless there's any data modelers in here, I'm sorry. But it's really important to get people speaking the same language so these services and APIs can talk to each other and be reused is fundamental. Discovering attributes and entities and Atlas approval. Don't like the last one, but it has to be there. You need some way of governing and get people to form that consistency. API developer. This is a piece now, again, you need to build dedicated gateways for security. And I say gateways here because I don't believe there's one type of gateway out there I'd recommend that say, use this one for your enterprise. You need to look at the problem that you're facing and what you're trying to fix. The one thing I would say is try to avoid multiple gateways in your business flow. You should try to drive towards consistency approach, because if you think about, you have AWS API gateway falling into another sort of say Camel internally. Okay, are they doing two different functions? Make sure they are, because you don't want the same gateway, two gateways doing the same thing, because then people will divide the behaviors and some of the things around, makes it another mess. Then API deployer. When we talked about this one, we says, well, it shouldn't be a question. If you build it, it should run anywhere. Just de facto. Forget about how it wants to be container deployed. You should build it so it can be. And as a general, when you're trying to talk to a larger organization, oh, this runs and this runs on this only. You shouldn't do it. Again, we're trying to talk to an organizational level change here. And then the bigger challenges, and something I still don't think we have basically been able to give direction on enough, is monitoring, version, and measurement. When you're building your in a API or anything, APIs should, by design, be able to be monitored, and that thinks about what your offering is to monitor. So it should start up, it should tell it where it runs and what it's doing. It should also, one of the cool things we've started doing is starting to publish the metrics and tells it its own performance. So how long did it take to start? Publish the last time it processed a message, how long it took. These are stats that can be processed at the process time. You can centralize that and use something like Splunk to actually start capturing, but there's a lot of things that the actual service could do. A lot of light pieces of metrics, which makes you understand what the service does a lot more. And then versioning of these is a massive challenge. So Paddy later on is going to talk a little about Camel. This is where we think it comes in, but hopefully we'll see. Open to interpretation. So to try and solve this problem, this is where some of the blocks we put together as a corporation to try and say, these are the things we need to think about. Data modeling. So we have this idea of a CIM, a common information model. This is a massive 10,000 plus organizational data breakdown of what all the different entities we think we need to talk to each other over. Again, for a corporation, it's huge. For a smaller company that's still growing, it's incredibly hard to make. For companies that want to change, it's one of the fundamentals. How does a company actually deal with that change? What does it mean to that model, and how do you maintain it going forward? Simple answer is you don't. You have to break it into layers. You break it into entities where your organization is. So you start off with a model, which then might lift up into a schema that you can interact with the model, which then lifts up again into an API. The API interacts with schema interacts with the model, because you need to give that layers of segregation across it. And that gets model information. The next box down there, developer portal, API gateway, management portal, are things that we know we need to build. You need, trying to create a world where we can give direction and help and support for teams that are going to build this out, you need these things in place. Developer portal, we'll talk a little bit later about. API gateway is the principle of basically, if you want to interact, you want to be able to stand something up that will allow routing into it, controls, be a common information point. And management portal If anybody's from a production support background, it's nice these things are built, but how do you control them when they actually go out in the wild? Registry and repository. One of the biggest challenges I always found is you build it, you get to tell people about it, and they then show you their version of it. It's nothing as really frustrating as when that happens. But, so we need to think about how do we register, down to the actual, if you give people the right way to build APIs, they should also be self-registering, self-publishing. So if you have this framework put in place, when they publish out, they actually publish out who I am, what I do. And that means that people then can have a registry and says, right, I'm a development team, I want to interact with policy information. You can go search for it, find out who's built one of these, what policy information has got available to it, and then you can actually go, well, don't have to build it myself, I can go talk to these guys and see, am I allowed to use their API? Identity stack is another problem. I think this is, again, when you get down to what you shouldn't be building. User repositories, user provisioning, and federation. There's challenges at the enterprise level. You shouldn't be inventing these wheels. I think as a development team, if you're sitting there going, I need to sort out my authentication and my authorization, you have something wrong with the company, because these are the same questions every team that's going to build an API is going to be solving, and really it should be a plug and play of something else. I'm not saying every company has them, but this is the thing, my view, and that we should be thinking about it so you don't have to solve these problems yourself. And by standard, monitoring should be built right the way through this, and CI/CD, the whole, again, the standardized behavior. So other stuff, and I'll let Patrick quite quickly get on to his piece next, but this is really the other things that we talked about that we thought we needed to make sure we had considered. The dark blue boxes is really some of the key categories as a consumer of an API, as a provider of an API, and as an admin of an API. What are the key categories you need to make sure you can tick yourself off to judge yourself, to say if you've got something in place, to say, I think we've actually got a level of maturity here. API catalog, API discovery, self-service onboarding. Self-service onboarding, a wee bit concerns around, because you don't want everybody just jumping on. You need some sort of controls, because a lot of the think about PI data that you start to share and how you could actually use it. API authorization and authentication, two different things, and I think a lot of people in the past have made the mistake of keeping those together when I think they're definitely distinct, different pieces. API versioning is one of the biggest problems. Maturity of data and the rollout of new functionality. That corporation change, talk about the messaging model, is again one of the biggest challenges. And if you don't put the right focus into that, you will never be able to actually get the true use out of all the services and APIs you're building. And then the administration control. Again, whoever runs your production support will love you if you do this the right way from the start. So that's just a quick rundown of the problems and some of the things we're trying to do to fix these. We have basically different areas trying to go off and think about these, trying to break them off into what would the right solution look like. Patty's going to give a talk about Camel, which jumps into one of the things we've been trying to do around, we have a large batch of legacy APIs, services built out, and we've been trying to work out how do we control people interacting with them in the right way, offer them out as an enterprise servicing. So that's one of the challenges. I'm going to stop there and hand over to Patrick, and we can continue on from there.
Hi everyone. So I'm just going to give you about 15 minutes on Apache Camel. I'll go through what it is, some of the terminologies, look at a bit of code, look at how a bit of routing is created, and talk about how we've used it in Allstate to satisfy some of our requirements. Has anybody here used Apache Camel or experience with it? 2, 3, oh, very good. So as you guys know, it's open source, lightweight integration tool. What we have done with it in Allstate is we have used it as a gateway layer. It can be used as a microservice layer, but primarily for us, we have so many, as Jason had mentioned, so many back-end APIs. We needed to give all of our clients one central location to be able to find these APIs, to be able to route them to the correct APIs. So whenever we receive a specific message in, there's so many different APIs that could correlate to, then we need to add routing logic to check the message container to figure out where they actually need to end up at. So with Camel, obviously the integration layer, it has so many components, it has so many options and solutions within it, that this is what we chose to use as our gateway. There is other tools that people talk about, Spring integration, maybe a little bit on Spring Zool, but the main part is that Camel came with so many components that we thought would be useful for us. So just to give a wee bit about on some of the enterprise integration patterns that are available and usable within Camel. The main one for us is routing. Routing is the big thing that we have to do within our gateway. If you are setting up a service layer, you could make use of any of these other patterns, you know, and it's sort of set out in the Enterprise Integration Patterns book, and there's details on all of these. There is specific things that we have where we have used recipient lists for different pieces of information to be sent to different clients, whether that's emails, but primarily the main point for us at the minute is routing. Likely in the future we'll probably take up more of these. As you know, there's other departments in Allstate that we know they've done APIs. We know we might have to start being a gateway for them as well, and we could maybe make use of some of these other patterns. So to give you a bit of terminology before I go into a little bit of code here. So your message, within a Camel route that we use, we receive a message, whether the message is a JMS or a JSON or a piece of XML or a piece of ACXML. It's just a message to us at the end of the day, and we have different tools for handling that message and for doing the business logic on them, whether that is JAX-B marshalling, whether that is simple just string manipulation, or we have also custom components for manipulating CSV files to check the data before we send it to someone else. So then we have the exchange. This is typically the message container. So whenever a message is received, it gets placed into an exchange by Camel, and it allows us to do work on that as it goes through the routing process. Endpoints are the big entry point here, is that endpoint is your provider and your consumer. So whenever we connect to any of our clients, to any of our backend systems, most of them are running via REST. So we expose a REST endpoint and we call a REST endpoint on the route. Next we have, as I want to talk about the components themselves. Camel has 263 available components. A component is basically a transport layer. So if I want to talk to JDBC, I want to talk to JMS, I want to speak to Kafka, I want to do a REST call. Apache Camel has all these components created. Obviously the big thing there is its abstraction, and that I don't have to worry about the finer details of opening up a JDBC connection, closing the JDBC connection, flushing it, committing it. You know, I don't need to worry about that anymore. And I know there is a lot of other tools out there like Spring Data that can do that as well, but Camel components are all about making it easy and a lot easier for us to develop and get things done quicker. Last thing is the Camel processor. So whenever I'm creating a route and I have an entry point and a place where I need to go to, generally I'll have to do some sort of processing within that. So data enrichment is generally one, data abstraction, or maybe just a bit of reporting. Within Camel you have a processor that allows you to do that, and I'll show you that in a second. So just to touch again on the components, you can go onto the Camel's website and go through the full list. There's a lot to scroll through, but if there's something you think you might need, more than likely they'll have it. Some of the common ones that we use is obviously REST, File, Kafka, and JMS. These are the ones that we would touch on the most, but it's just to give you an idea of what's available, and if you check that website, you'll definitely be able to find what you need. So what is a route? So this is just one I've taken from the Camel website itself. It's a very basic route. We have an inbound queue, maybe a JMS. We have a message router, and then we have two separate backend queues we want to send something to. In the middle, we got to do some sort of work, and that work is going to be processing. It's going to be the actual routing itself. So this can be written, the route itself can be written in Java or XML or Spring DSL. What I'll do is I'll show you as an example of this. I didn't take an Allstate example. I just created a little piece of code here for just to step through. So I have a piece of JSON. This JSON is, I'm not really worried about what it is. It comes in, it dogs information, I've been told I need this to go to a file. Okay, so I'll simply write that out. This is a route. This is a very, very straightforward route. There's nothing really happening on it. It's just a consumer. It's just going to take in the information. So from dog info to a dog file. Dog info can be anything. But then when I've gotten more requirements, I figured out what's needed. I've been required to create a REST endpoint. So I create a REST post endpoint. Camel will create this for me with the Camel component is created here. So where you see REST, that Camel knows at the beginning, okay, I need to pick up the REST component. Then it creates the HTTP request method, it's a post. Then it will create up the endpoint for me, which is a dog route. I just called it dog route for my own testing here. What will happen then is if someone hits that endpoint with the JSON that I've shown as an example of, it'll automatically get dumped into this dog file. You can see I've made use of the file component. Again, the code there isn't much code going on there. I don't need to go and create a file. I don't need no file output stream. I don't need anything like that. We can add properties onto that if if a file exists, create it with another name and stuff like that, and then you can append to certain files. But this one is just to give you a sample. So if I expand that out a bit more, I'm being told now that I'm getting more information in on the JSON request, but the same requirement is there. I just want the dog's information. So I've been sent the dogs, cats, and slugs data. I don't need to worry about the bottom two. I only want to know the dogs and put that into a separate file where someone will use that for some sort of business processing. So if I write that out, so I've changed it from a dog route, it's probably a pet route now, so it takes in all sorts of information. I then have a choice. I need to check, is it a dog? If it is a dog, send it to the dog file. If it's not, then just send it straight to the pet file. Unknown. I'm not really worried about what it is. So here's a little bit more of a fleshed out example, which generally what we would have in Allstate. What would happen is a piece of data would come in. We would then have to split that down into the individual messages within that. So I'm going to select each pet here. And I've used JSON Path. JSON Path is obviously packaged with the Camel libraries, so you can take the dependency in quite easily. I take out each pet. Then all I'm doing is I want to check if the animal type for this particular message is a dog. And I'll send that, as again, straight to the dog file. The choice, as you could say, it's probably like an if statement. Some of you guys can probably think, well, it'll probably take me a lot more lines of code to do all this, but that's where Camel comes in that it's abstracting everything it's doing. If you think about it, it's doing so many things here for me, creating the REST component, doing the JSON path, doing the choice logic, converting it, then obviously creating the file. So there's a lot of things going on in a small amount of code, and that was one of the reasons why we chose Camel. So at the end of the day then, you end up with a route builder class where you can list all your routes that you have. I think in our current gateway we have around 700, so we've multiple different types of route builder classes. Some of them take in different types of data, some of them do different things, but at the end of the day it's going to be just one route builder class. So that is very much a very high level overview and a bit of information on what Apache Camel is. But at the end of the day, it's processors, it's components, it's enterprise integration patterns, it has routes, capabilities, and obviously a routing engine. So for integration, it's perfect. It is competing with a lot of other applications out there. But have a look at it if you're ever considering doing something like what I've just talked about. Then, one of the big things that happened in Apache Camel 2.15 is the Spring Boot compatibility. So if you go onto the Spring Initializer website, you can reference Camel and generate your project for you, and it'll give you a very easy application to start playing with right away. The importance of what happened with Spring compared to the application we're currently using, which we don't use with Spring at the minute, is that it manages the Camel context. The Camel context is pretty much the engine. So it'll start the Camel context. It'll add all of my routes. It knows where all my routes are because I'm using Spring annotations for the route builder class. I don't have to worry about, maybe I've released something and I haven't referenced a particular route in the correct file, whether that will be our XML-based routes file or our Java-based routes file. Spring knows where to look for these things, and we have certain properties and certain things we can configure. But the main point is that it's making life easier. And the main point is auto configuration, is what happened recently. So we have around, I think for managing the Camel context within our gateway, it's around 4 or 5 classes. Whenever we do, eventually Jason gives me the budget to rewrite it all. Well, we won't have those. We won't have to worry about those. We won't have to maintain those. And it should be a lot easier for us. So that was a pretty quick overview of what we're doing with Camel, what we use it for. But thank you.